Passover is the holiday of Jewish liberation. We, the Jewish nation, need liberation from our enemies now more than ever. One of the highlights of Passover this year is the privilege we have to hear words of Jewish liberation from the head of Machon Shilo, Rabbi David Bar-Hayim, and Jewish hero and visionary Yehonatan Pollard. Welcome, Yonathan.
Thank you.
And
Chag Sameach.
Moadim l'simcha. Rabbi Bar-Hayim.
Chag Sameach. Happy festival of Passover to one and all, and particularly to my friend with whom I have the pleasure of conversing once again, Yonathan Pollard. Shalom.
Shalom, Chag Sameach.
The well-known Chinese curse, "May you live in interesting times," seems to be very applicable to our current situation. I don't mean just we, the Jewish people. The world in its entirety seems to be in every possible state of flux and degeneration. And perhaps we'll touch upon some of these things a bit later, but let us perhaps begin with things closer to home, which also, of course, impact many things that go on around the world, or at least much of the world thinks it impacts them, and they therefore have what to say about everything. Let's talk about Gaza. Let's talk about Rafah, or as the Arabs call it, Rafah. My understanding is that an Israeli military action in that southern city, in the Gaza Strip, is imminent. What can you add to that bare bones description?
First of all, I think we have to understand that the delay in assaulting Rafah has been criminal. Our government and our military's subservience to American demands to hold off an assault because of its possible effect on the Arabs that are currently serving as a protective force, more or less, for the remnants of Hamas in Rafah, have resulted in such a delay that the Hamas battalions in Rafah have been given the time to basically increase the fortifications of their positions in Rafah. And it's going to be, when we move in, it will have we'll be facing the same kind of problem that the Marines, U.S. Marines had in Ramadi, where they would break into a home, a building, and they would find a bunker inside, concrete lined bunker inside. And they would have to spend a lot of time and blood taking that bunker, only to have the enemy in the last moments escape through an underground passage and then blow the building up on the Marines above.
Okay. I'm sorry, but I will interrupt you for one moment, because one of our viewers has just asked if there's someone whistling in the background.
No,
I'd just like to point out to everyone that the Jewish people is alive and well, and now it is Pesach, it is Passover. And many Jews are celebrating the fact that it's
there's a lot of wine outside.
And there's a lot of people who are happy and celebrating and thanking Hashem for everything we have got, and praying to Hashem for those things that we have not yet achieved.
Right.
And if you hear some music in the background,
it's not mine.
To mention it's none of us, but it is the Jewish people expressing their joy during this festival of Pesach.
Yeah, that's cold comfort at about 1 o'clock in the morning. So, a lot of joy and suffering at the same time, which I guess is part of Jewish life. No, but as far as Rafah, we have to understand that the delay that the Americans have caused is going to result in increased casualties amongst our people. Also, we seem, from what I understand, to have agreed not to use heavy ordnance during the actual assault on Rafah. whether it's aerial bombs, artillery, or direct fire by tanks or other weapon systems, which means it's going to be our blood that's used instead of bombs. Bombs instead of bodies instead of bombs, as I put it. So we're going to be going maybe house to house, and the butcher's bill will be very high. I have said from the beginning that there are two things that have to happen before an assault on Rafah. Number one, the Philadelphia corridor, which separates Rafah, Gaza, Rafah from the Egyptian side, has to be occupied by the army straight away. And there has to be a very deep ditch built separating the two in order to cut the tunnel systems that Hamas has used to bring in equipment and to exfiltrate individuals, say for training in Iran, and then to bring them back, all under the watchful eye and concurrence of the Egyptian government. So that has to happen first. And while I understand that a lot of the refugees, so to speak, are hard against the Egyptian border, running right into the Philadelphia corridor, they just have, in one way, into these new camps that we're spending a fortune building north of Rafah. We're going to have to cut off all aid, food aid, any other kind of aid into Rafah, cut it off. And if we occupy the Philadelphia corridor, the Egyptians can't bring in humanitarian aid convoys that will keep these refugees there, these human shields, as the Americans are using them as, to protect Hamas there. So we have to tell them,
No, please go ahead. I'm sorry.
If you want to eat, you have to go north. Otherwise, there's no food coming in. Those are two of the prerequisites if we are serious about taking Rafah. As far as the tactics that are used, I'm very worried and I'm very concerned that we have acceded to American demands to limit the use of heavy ordnance rather, against these fortified buildings. The other report that came in, and this is relevant for Gaza, for the Rafah operation, is the army has now admitted that there may be close to 7 or 8, possibly even 10,000 Hamas terrorists in the north. Not just
in northern Gaza.
Northern Gaza, not just in Khan Yunis. They're coming up there also from the tunnels, but in the north that we thought had been cleansed of them, they're now coming up out of the tunnel system. So what I and several others are afraid of is that when the Rafah operation is initiated, that they will stage an attack on our thin units, our small units that are still in the northern part of Gaza as a diversion. Whether that happens or not, or whether Sinwar and others of his ilk in the Hamas establishment will tell them, just lay low. The Israelis are going to be leaving soon, and we'll call upon you to come up and reestablish Hamas control over Gaza City, just as we will over Khan Yunis when they leave. And that's a certain eventuality that they will leave. So this situation in Gaza right now is fraught with danger, mostly because we delayed the attack on Rafah, the occupation of the Philadelphia corridor, cutting the escape routes, which should have been the first thing on our counterattack after October 7th, but there was still time for it. Now the statements are coming out of Hamas. There may be only 40 or less hostages that are still alive. The fact that our tactics are going to be so ineffective that our casualty lists will be very high, and the possibility of an insurrection in our rear areas in Gaza City by all these Hamas terrorists that have just been waiting patiently in their tunnels by virtue of the humanitarian aid that their organization has been hijacking. And at the same time, it must be said that the Biden administration is still claiming, despite all the evidence to the contrary, that we are starving the Gazans of food. And I mean, Israeli diplomats have expressed confusion and shock over why the Biden administration is continuing to perpetrate this lie, this blood libel, in the face of all the evidence, video evidence, that there's a surplus of food now in Gaza. You look at any video of the main markets, whether it's in Rafah or in Khan Yunis or even in Gaza City up north, they never had it so good. Okay, so you have all these things happening at the same time with Gaza.